We continue now with our Right of Way series, looking at how pedestrians, cars and bikes coexist on our crowded roads. For our next discussion, this picture says it all. Taken this morning at Charles Circle, it shows how cyclists are a common part of Boston's rush hour. That's partly due to the city's efforts to make streets safer for bicycles, but reconfiguring old city streets for new modes of transportation is a difficult and expensive proposition. Jared Bowen takes a look at how the city is rebuilding for bikes and the challenges that remain.
Boston is for bikes. That was a message Mayor Tom Menino began peddling 6 years ago. Now, the city is in a cycle of change.
We added 60 miles of bike lane, 1,000 racks. We're still one of the only U.S. cities to have bike share.
The city is becoming swell on wheels. That's two wheels. So how did it happen? First of all, says Boston bike czar Nicole Friedman, Boston is inherently bike-friendly.
I say we've got some incredible strengths. We're a very dense city. The distances are perfect for bike. In 1 mile, you can crisscross the city.
Nearly 2 years ago, Boston launched Hubway, a public-private partnership placing 72 solar-powered stations sporting bikes throughout the city, all within blocks of each other. Riders with memberships or paying on the spot grab one of 700 bikes, ride to wherever they're going, and leave it at the next closest station.
The whole point with Hubway was to mainstream cycling, get the average person on a bike. And it's done that. When you look at people on the Hubway bikes, they're wearing nice outfits, they're wearing suits, they're wearing dresses. They're not cyclists.
For the rise in riders, the city had to literally lay the groundwork. Numerous streets now feature designated bike lanes at least 5 feet wide. And for narrow spaces, like the heavily trafficked Mass Ave, it took collaboration.
There were so many crashes, and we worked for a full year, the mayor was supportive, with all of the businesses, and we ended up removing 70 car parking spots along Mass Ave. We were able to relocate handicap spots, loading spots, and we haven't seen a pushback at all.
On some of the city's broader boulevards, like Western Avenue in Allston, the city created protected bike lanes or cycle tracks, where parked cars actually serve as the buffer between drivers and cyclists, a common practice in Europe.
We've got great bike lanes, and they work for a lot of people, but if we want to get people like my mother on a bike, they want even more protection.
And Boston has begun creating bike boxes, giving cyclists a safe place to make turns ahead of drivers.
What it does is a couple things. One, it allows a cyclist to queue up at a red light ahead of the cars, and it really legitimizes for the cyclist the safest place to be.
All right, so we just showed you all of the parts of the city that are well attended to in downtown Boston, but across town here in Allston, it's a bit of an uphill battle where it seems anything goes. But you've identified this particular spot as a really problematic area. Why?
Well, I like to highlight this spot because it's sort of the ground zero for a lot of cyclists in the advocacy community. On one side of the bridge over here, we had a young lady, Kelly Wallace, who died in 2007, and on the other side of the bridge, another young lady, Kirsten Malone, died in 2004. For a lot of people, it's been a source of morbid, I guess, inspiration.
Cycling advocate Peter Stidman says there's still much to be done, especially in places like this chaotic intersection at Harvard and Cambridge Streets, which features what appears to be only the hint of a bike lane. As a rule, Stidman says, cyclists operate from fear.
The thing to remember is the main motivation of a cyclist is not to get killed.
He'd also like to see more cycle tracks throughout the city, especially on problem corridors like Harvard Ave and the equally frenzied Huntington Avenue. And he's dismayed that it's not happening in the Seaport District, a part of town being built from the ground up, but not for bikes.
We know that they've measured all the streets, and streets like on the Seaport side of D Street are wide enough to have cycle tracks, but that communication really isn't happening to the developers.
Stidman also wants more attention paid to the city's outlying neighborhoods like Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan, and in neighborhoods like Charlestown and South Boston, where he says cyclists feel severed from the city.
We have very few people who bike to work, and I think one of the reasons why is that we have connections like this, the Broadway Bridge, where there's no facility for bicyclists specifically. You can come up here on the sidewalk with the pedestrians, but they're not going to appreciate that.
Bike advocates like Stidman are quick to point out they're grateful for all the city has done already, and that building Boston for bikes really has been a collaboration, but also a challenge on both sides for change.
And Jared Bowen is here along with Jason Schreiber, an urban planner with the design firm Nelson Nygaard, and Thomas Tinlin, Transportation Commissioner for the City of Boston. Welcome to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, Jared, I was thinking about this. We've talked about pedestrians and cars and bikes, but you're a runner, and you've been running the city streets since I've known you. Is that different, do you think, than bicycling, or do you find some of the same challenges?
I think there's a cultural shift now, and it's interesting to see what happens because, of course, runners, by and large, run on the sidewalk. But when you're crossing streets or you're in places like the Esplanade or whatnot, then it's sort of a game of, again, anything goes. But I found myself in the last couple of years being more mindful of always staying to the right so that if a bike comes up alongside me, it can pass over. But you know, the culture hasn't shifted entirely, so you still have people on sidewalks, you still have people running lights. So I think we're all acclimating in the city to get used to the infrastructure and to get used to this new mindset.
You know, Tom, I've gotten more and more, largely because of this series, aware of all the signage. I didn't realize about those bike boxes. I didn't know what they were for. I mean, I don't know how you educate people. And also, this is a naive question, is it legal to drive a car in the bike lane?
It is not legal to drive a car in a bike lane, a dedicated bike lane. You know, 6 years ago when Mayor Menino coined the phrase, the car is no longer king in the city, people thought it was just that. It's just a cute little phrase and the city's not serious about it. I believe that Mayor Menino and people like Nicole Friedman have put that to the test. You know, we've changed the culture in the city where we've introduced bike riders onto our public ways like never before. It falls under the whole complete streets mantra about design, good urban design. So what we've done is tried to best to educate the driver, but also the cyclist. You know, we talk about mutual respect of the cyclist and the driver. When you look at 6 years ago, there was 1 mile of bike lane in the city that I, as Transportation Commissioner, didn't even know where it was. You know, we now have 60 miles of on-street infrastructure. When we talk about our Hubway program, 2,500 bike trips a day in the city of Boston, just on the Hubway system. So I think that we've come such a long way, and it is all about safety. As you know, when Mayor Menino talks about cycling in the city, he talks about mutual respect between the cyclist and the driver. But we also talk about things like bike helmets, which is why what you're going to see this year, which no other city has done, is we're going to introduce bike vending machines, bicycle helmet vending machines, where we have Hubway stations. So we're looking to have 14 of these bike helmet vending machines in the city. So I think the more that you introduce cyclists to the roadways, the more the driver understands we need to share the road.
Because my unscientific survey proved that about 50% of the people wear helmets and 50% of them don't. But Jason, I mean, to put it quaintly, right now the bike paths are kind of a patchwork, and you got the different kinds. You know, the track lanes, and then you've got the bike. I mean, is it feasible to integrate this, not just in the city of Boston, but through, you know, Cambridge and Somerville and, you know, the wider metropolitan area? You know, the suburbs are kind of a different animal.
It's definitely an infrastructure challenge because we have such old roadways in the Northeast in particular. Cambridge has spent a lot of time putting in some infrastructure over the years, and Boston has really, really expanded their infrastructure, but certainly there's gaps, and that last segment talked a lot about that. But Boston's at this point where it's really starting to motivate such significant change that we're going to start to see, hopefully, better infrastructure in places like the Seaport District because, A, there's been this big emphasis on the complete streets, as the Commissioner talks about. And nationally, all sorts of cities are really saying we've got to be able to accommodate the cyclists, the walkers, transit, and cars at the same time in the same space. And it's been very successful, not just for movement, but for economic development. And secondly, B, it's a cultural change. Sure. Culturally, and we talked a little bit about that, you're seeing more and more people embracing this and saying, well, okay, it's all right to bike on the street. That's what Hubway has done. And maybe it's all right to, you know, not always be on the sidewalk where there's people. I think the most important piece about the infrastructure, whether we get it right from beginning to end or not, is letting the driver be aware that there's a cyclist out there. And that's really the number one thing. All those bicycle markings, the signs, the pavement markings, got much more to do with driver awareness and education than the cyclists themselves. Have
you ever run in a track lane, Jared? A cycle
well,
lane.
I mean, the problem with running is that the pavement is actually softer than running on hard cement sidewalks. So sometimes.
No, but the bikers say that the pedestrians jump into those track lanes, like the one on Western Avenue, and say, "Hey, well, this is cool, a place for me to walk."
Right, and I do think that's part of the reason, because pavement is a little bit softer, so it's easier on knees and whatnot. But it's everybody. And I think it's also a process, like you were just saying, of osmosis. Just driving around, suddenly you're seeing more and more bike lanes. I mean, I talked to Nicole Friedman about that. They don't want to go, and as you can attest, they don't want to go wholeheartedly doing everything all at once, because the city really couldn't handle it. But if you do bit by bit, people are absorbing it, and they're realizing that it is changing. And I think if you're reading about science and you're more environmentally friendly, so you sort of embrace having bikers out there, not clogging up the roads, helping the environment, not using up gasoline. So it's a very interesting time.
Where do y'all stand about the theory that bikes should be integrated into traffic as opposed to on the right? I mean, a lot of people think that that's more dangerous to have them on the side of the road as opposed to just more integrated with the traffic.
Well, I think, from our experience and what you've seen, Ashley, is it is not a one-size-fits-all program, which is why you will have a cycle track, you will have a dedicated bike lane, then you'll have a shared lane. But what we're saying is that everybody who is on wheels has equal footing on our public ways. The streets and sidewalks. In theory. In theory. But the streets and sidewalks make up the vast majority of your public space. And the public space should be equal and accessible to everyone. As Pete points out, when we talk about the South Boston Waterfront, for example, we just installed a bike lane on A Street. People loved that. We're designing on Summer Street in South Boston, right in front of the convention center, we're designing a cycle track. It would be transformative. You can get on a hubway at South Station and come up Summer Street to the convention center in South Boston. I mean, these are the things, these links. And you're right, is it perfect right now? Connectivity is our goal, but you have to start somewhere. And we look at these drivers of, no pun intended, we look at these drivers that generate a lot of pedestrians, and then we introduce bicycles to that. I mean, 2,500 trips a day on Hubway, that blows away any thought that we could have had for success.
Is it realistic that you're going to get 30–40% more people by, I think, 2030? Is the mission of the state traveling this way?
I mean, you're going to get hundreds more percent growth, but it's such a small percentage right now.
It's tiny, 0.7% commute on a bike.
When you look at the U.S. versus other countries, we pale by comparison.
Oh, we were talking to somebody last night who said that Beijing has gone the exact opposite direction. Everybody used to be on a bike, and now everybody's in a car.
But they still have a much higher cycling percentage because that's their culture. And we're slowly building that culture, which is a great thing. But it's true, a bicycle is technically a vehicle, and so they need to share that space, and sometimes it's the best and safest thing is to actually have everybody share where it's nice and slow. But when we get out to Western Ave, where it's a little bit more spread out and there's the ability to have an exclusive bike lane, that makes a lot of sense. All styles, all flavors. Portland, Oregon, they actually intentionally mix all of the cars and the bikes to travel at 12 miles an hour through their downtown.
Drivers, wouldn't you say, Jared, pretty much still rule, and they get annoyed with the bikers. Like, you're in my way.
Absolutely. I mean, there are many things you're contending with. I mean, first of all, we're notorious, of course, in Boston for our aggressive drivers, and yeah, it's a difficult confluence.
Yeah, it really is. All right, Jared Bowen, as always, thanks for coming. Jason Schreiber and Tom Tinlin will be following this all week.
Great.
That's it for Greater Boston. What do you think about Boston's focus on biking? Sound off on our special Right of Way Facebook page and see what other people think. That's at facebook.com, Right of Way 2013. Our series continues tomorrow. Adam Riley has a quick look.
Emily, tomorrow we're going to look at bike safety in the suburbs with a focus on Wellesley. After the tragic death of a cyclist last year, Wellesley is trying to reinvent itself as a more bike-friendly community. We go on a riding tour with one local cyclist who says that won't be easy.
Thanks, Adam, and be sure to tune in to 89.7 WGBH Radio, WGBHnews.org, and our partners at Wicked Local for more right-of-way coverage all this week. I'm Emily Rooney. Thanks for watching.